Hey, want to welcome everybody to the latest Denny Artachi Show podcast. Have a special guest and friend of mine, Mr. Mark Brechbill, a CPA professional, but we have some things in common. He loves music. He helps promote music.
Yep.
And he's got a great business and practice in Stewart. Gosh, we've known each other for a while, Mark. I've performed for some of your parties.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Denny's done some charity events that we do up there. A lot of charity events, raising money for various charities using music and concerts and things. And he's been working with me for a long time on that. Plus, kind of helped me out a little bit. Again, raising money for charity, but. When I was running for commissioner up in
that's
Stewart,
right. You almost became part of the
establishment.
establishment.
But the thing that Denny's right. He and I share a common interest. We're both crazy, and
that's for sure, without a doubt. Yeah.
So generally, we get along pretty well. But,
if you haven't noticed his pipes, Mark has his own radio show. How long have you been doing your radio show?
About 22 years.
22 years. Dude, is there that much to talk about?
No, you just recycle.
Oh, is that what it is?
Well, it's actually kind of interesting because it's something we'll talk about today. Is that in general, things just happen again, and again and again.
Recycled and recycled.
And we're in a recycled economy right now. It's a lot like 1980. It's looking a lot like this. 1980 or so.
Well, one of the reasons...
You're a better singer. Go ahead.
One of the reasons I have you on here is I don't have too many CPA tax professionals with your brilliant... Dude, you're too cerebral sometimes. You ask Mark a question.
Is that the way of saying I'm boring?
No, not boring. But, dude, if I ask you what time it is, you're going to tell me not only how the watch is made, but what the thoughts were put together to make the watch, to tell you what time it is. But I think a lot of my listeners, like me, were looking at this economy, and, oh, my God, did you think we'd see this inflation like we're seeing now?
Yes.
You did. You predicted that this was coming.
Yes, actually, and I got a radio show I can pull up.
You
to
can
show
pull it
you
up.
That.
All right. So why do you think it happened? This inflation.
Well, I'll tell you, and I'm just going to give you a real quick background.
Yeah,
so
real quick, Mark,
understand.
because they'll be like,
That's right. So, I started out. When I graduated from college, I started out in public accounting. I worked with Arthur Andersen, and I was in their banking division. So I had a lot of exposure to banking and finance back then. And then I left Arthur Andersen to go to work ultimately in the banking industry. And in 1978,
You're dating yourself, dude.
that's right.
How old are you?
I'm 67 now, I guess.
Wow.
I think 67. So in 1978, I took a job. And at the time, I was 22, and I took a job, 23, took a job as chief financial officer of a $60 million bank, a small community bank, all right? So at that size bank, and even a little bigger, your job is to be the economist as well. So,
Okay.
So in 1978, I was pretty actively involved in the economy and in actually dealing from a fairly high level in a bank of what was going on in the economy, right?
So again, why do we have this inflationary period that we're having now?
And it's because first of all, nobody can control the economy, and what's happening is the Fed. You first have to understand the Fed. The Fed has no real control over interest rates. Zero. Here's how that works.
Well, he's raised them a lot this year, so.
But it has.
People are not buying houses. Did you know the housing sales are down about 30%?
Oh yeah,
this
yeah.
year?
Well, and that makes sense because
you
interest rates are up,
That's right.
and you can predict that. I mean, you could predict.
How could you have predicted? Seriously, all kidding aside, interest rates before a year and a half ago were so low, and they have astronomically ballooned in the last year and a half. You predicted that?
Yeah, I mean, it really because of it wasn't that difficult because I've seen it happen before.
Okay.
This happened in 1978 through 1982.
Okay.
All right. It happened during the Carter administration and the beginning of the Reagan administration when he had to solve the problem. And so you could see it coming. And here's what is interesting, and here's right where we are now, I think.
Yeah, what is the catalyst?
It's always government spending. It's always government spending.
They're terrible at managing money. We're up to what, 34 trillion in debt?
Yeah. I mean, and
I stopped counting
just
after
today,
30 trillion.
They've got $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion bill that they're proposing as a spending bill.
Okay.
So, and I haven't seen that bill yet because it was just announced at 9 o'clock this morning, and we're roughly around 10 o'clock. So
Okay.
I haven't seen that yet. But what happened in the late 70s, and I remember it vividly because I had just come into the bank I was working for, and I was young at the time, 23, and I was taken over for a guy who was still in the bank. He had moved on to the loan side, right? And he had been their investment person. And so I kind of moved into this situation, and I had done a budget. I was doing a budget this time of the year, right? You're doing budgets.
You know why I'm laughing, right?
Why?
You still haven't answered my question.
I'm getting there.
If you were in court, I'd treat you as a hostile witness.
I'm getting there. But you have to understand why, because
I am trying to understand why. This is a global issue, right? Not just in America?
Right.
Okay.
It is a global. Now, back in the 70s, there was more control because the U.S. had more power and more influence internationally. We were the big economy. The old saying in those days was, if the U.S. got a cold, Europe got the flu. And so so you have to remember, from an economic standpoint, the Fed had a little more control, no control, but a little more influence because they were U.S. And so you didn't have to deal with the central bank in London and all that kind of stuff. And so what happened in the late 70s, Carter was president, and he all of a sudden, figured out he did a couple things. One, they were raising taxes, and they were also he was raising taxes a little bit, but at the same time he was pumping money into various programs. There were a number of social programs that were being kicked into gear at that time. So including how to handle certain things with Social Security
But Mark, we've been living in a lower tax rate environment,
right?
Low inflation rate environment, and it's blown. I mean, don't tell me it's just because Trump lost and Biden's president.
No, it has to do with it actually has to do with it has to do with the amount of money that we're spending, and we are pumping a lot of money in the system, and it's still out there.
For example, during COVID, all the stimulus didn't help inflation, right?
Right, exactly. It didn't absolutely.
Help at all.
I mean, and what happened is we actually overstimulated the economy. We gave a lot of money that didn't actually stay in the business environment, but actually passed directly through to the employees and raised the amount of money that they had. Anytime that labor starts increasing its price and it becomes embedded, you can't get it out. So that's how you can tell when it's starting. When you hear people start saying, okay, we need more money, or people are getting more money, that means they got more money to spend. And you can talk all you want about the supply chain and all that, but it has nothing to do with that. I mean, that's one of the issues in terms of, creating shortages and so that there hasn't been an even increase all across the board in everything. But when you look at it, labor is in everything. And the more that labor's in things and the more that the price increases become embedded in labor, the less likely you are to ever have that go down. And the rates have to go up because as soon as labor goes up, business will increase its prices to offset that and more than offset it because they have to increase their prices to cover that cost of labor and anticipate it going forward. So they're always going to estimate on the high side. So as soon as you hear people start saying it's time that labor gets an increase, and they may need an increase. Labor always ends up last.
They've been talking about the $15 an hour minimum wage, which I think they passed, but they're raising it incrementally.
Right.
Right, $1 each year until it gets to 15.
It depends. Florida's doing it one way,
okay.
Federal government, but and that's
here's an interesting thing too. I know a lot of people were afraid that taxes were going up, but that has not happened as of yet. The Biden administration's been in it for 2 years. I don't know. I don't know if time will run out before 2024, I think, before they raise taxes.
Oh, it's already in there.
Well, it's in there how?
Well, remember the Build Back Better? And
yes.
Build Back Better started out at something like $7 trillion, right?
Okay.
And then,
which is nothing, folks. That's just that's not a lot of money.
One of the places I lived, actually, one of the places.
Why not make it 10 trillion? Who cares?
Well, one of the places where I first moved into banking, and I was chief financial officer of this bank when I was 23. I was in a little town called Pekin, Illinois, and Pekin is outside of Peoria, middle of the Midwest. But anyway, our congressperson from Pekin and from that portion of Illinois was a guy named Everett Dirksen. And I don't know if you remember Everett Dirksen. He's known for two things. One, he wanted to make the marigold the national flower, and that didn't happen. But two...
Now, why would I know a guy from, like, the Midwest somewhere?
Because he has a famous...
Did he have his TV show or something?
No, he's got a famous saying.
What's his famous saying?
He was the
Build Back Better?
No, he was the congressperson. Yeah, that's right. He was the congressperson that said a million here and a million there, and pretty soon we're talking about real dollars. That's what he said when this spending bill was
sounds like something Yogi Berra would say.
Exactly, but now it's funny. Now it's a trillion here and a trillion there, and we're talking about real dollars. But
so they have not officially put legislation to raise taxes, but you think they're raising taxes in a backdoor way?
Oh, and no, they have put stuff through, and they do have the mechanism.
But I haven't seen a proposal that rates are going higher.
It's not rates.
What is it?
There's way more to taxes than just rates.
Okay.
All right. So what the president and the Democrats that control the House, by the way, the tax bills come out of the House, what they've learned, and actually on the Senate side, Bernie Sanders is a genius on this, and I'm not a fan.
You told me once that they want inflation to go higher because they'll collect more money because of it.
Well, they pay off all this debt, all this money they're borrowing, they pay it off with cheaper dollars. The dollar's not worth as much because of inflation.
Okay.
But what I tell you where Bernie is a genius, and he is, and I do not agree at all with the socialist philosophy. And of course, Bernie is a socialist, and he said that. But he figured it out, and nobody else seems to have done that yet, especially on the Republican side of the aisle. But here's what he figured out. When the Affordable Care Act was proposed, right? Most of you remember that during the Obama administration, President Obama said, "This is not a tax. It is not a tax. It is not a tax. It is not a tax." And so They
also said you can go to any doctor, keep your doctors,
right,
and do all that stuff.
But anyway, the big point was financially, he said it's not a tax. All right, so it goes to the Supreme Court. That was decided 5-4 with Chief Justice Roberts coming out with the deciding opinion. He was the one that made the decision on that. Now, here's what he said. He said it's a tax. He said it's a tax, and we can tax, and as a tax, Congress has the right to do that, and they can do whatever they want as a tax. And so, and they're still trying to argue, the administration's still trying to argue it was not a tax, and yet Chief Justice Roberts was saying if it's not a tax, it's not allowed. It's unconstitutional. So the Affordable Care Act was deemed constitutional only because it was a tax. Now, fast forward a few years. When Trump was president, at the early part of his term, he had the ability to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. But for whatever reason, the Republicans couldn't get it done. So
I think Senator McCain had a deciding vote,
absolutely.
And he squashed it.
But here's what happened. So Trump decided that what he was going to do is he was going to make the penalty, which was the tax, he was going to make the penalty on the Affordable Care Act zero, right? And then his argument was, and it went to the Supreme Court, his argument was, how can it be a tax if it's not raising revenue? Zero. If there's zero tax, there's no penalty left anymore. How can you possibly?
But I thought the only penalty on the Affordable Care Act was those who were not accurate in their income projections. They made too much money, and therefore they had to pay back the surplus that they were given to by the government.
No, that's the credit side. That's the credit that they're giving you. And if you could get that credit paid in advance, and if you estimated your income too low, then you wouldn't earn that credit. So you're going to have to pay some of that credit back.
Okay.
The penalty is on the side that if you decide not to have insurance. Remember when that first came
that's
out,
right.
if
That's
you
right.
don't have
Yes.
qualified insurance.
That's right. I forgot that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was, and that was what was.
And it was going up incrementally each year that you delayed it. That's correct.
Well,
yes.
and so what they were doing is, and there were a couple things in there.
But we got off track. I think for my listeners and me, is how did we get into this inflationary environment that we are now?
I'm getting to that. I'm just trying to. I'm getting to it.
Forget what time it is, folks. We're going to tell you how the watch is made and the logic behind the watch.
But I'm going to tell you what happened and how we got here and why Congress has put us in a position. They got a lot of power right now.
Okay.
And so what happened on this thing is that, again, Trump challenged this with the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that it was still a tax.
Okay.
So now Bernie realized all you have to do is call it a tax, and you can do whatever you want. You can have tax credits, and you can do whatever you want. So Bernie wants he wanted a base income, everybody in the United States get $1,000 a month base income. That's a big proposal there, right? You say, well, nobody will ever vote for that.
Well,
they
no,
don't have
of course
to.
not.
They don't have to. There's a child credit and an earned income credit, and all you have to do is raise the income levels so that everybody qualifies, and then give it to them in advance. And we did that. And that's still in the act. That was part of that bill was.
And where's that money coming from?
It's coming from the government printing it. I mean, it's
from the bill passed.
Yeah, from the yes, and they have re-implemented the Affordable Care Act. So, you got to look out there and look at what's going on in the economy. It's not only a lot of this stuff is buried in the spending bill.
So do you think because of this, people were spending more, and that's what caused?
Oh, absolutely. Do you know that? I mean, you probably know for the last.
I think this year, people are spending less. They're holding on to their money.
Well,
interest rates are higher. I think retail sales are off. I don't think people are spending like they were a year or two ago.
It's starting to have an impact right now, but
going forward,
you've got other sides of this thing where, some things now are starting to become affordable.
Like what?
Housing, because it's dropping so fast. I mean, housing was going up so fast. Now it's dropping. And like you said, 30% drop? Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd say sales are off 30%. But you're no longer buying a mortgage for 3 and 4%. It's around 6%.
Right. And if you
or higher.
Now, if you look at that, as an investment guy.
That's a huge difference.
Right. As an investment guy, you know this. If I have a fixed rate investment,
right.
and that investment is 4%, right? And it's fixed 4% for 30 years. Maybe it's got a duration of 12, which is the length of time that average will stay outstanding. It's got a 12 or 13-year duration, right? If interest rates go up to 6%, what's going to happen to the value of that bond? It's going to go down, right? If the market yield goes to 6 and you're at 4, the principal value is going to go down because you're going to have to be a premium.
That's why you think it's affecting the housing market in the same way.
Absolutely. That move between 4 and 6% is easily 30% effect on. If you had a bond, that would be a 30% reduction in that bond.
I never really thought
that.
I never thought about that the real estate market could behave like bonds as rates go higher.
And you asked me earlier in the show, how did I predict
how did you predict that we were going to be in this?
Right. And I did it in somewhat the same way that I did with back in, because I hit the turn in 2007 too, and people on the housing market, and people ask, well, how did you hit the turn in the housing market? It was very easy. People, when they buy homes, right, they don't care, what it costs a lot of times. They care how much they can afford, but they don't care how much it costs. And so they don't look at it as an investment, right? But it is an investment. The market, it's an investment. Well over 25 to 30% of the mortgage market, of the real estate market, are investors. So when you want to look at what's going to happen with the housing market,
When you say investors, meaning people who want to flip properties, or
not flip, hold and lease,
and
and
appreciate,
that kind of,
right? Because think about it. If you can average 12 to 14% in appreciation, you're not going to necessarily do that consistently in the stock market.
Right. So what I did back in 2007 is I looked at what the lease payments were. I used the income approach. On commercial property, they use what's called the income approach, and they determine your income, and they use a cap rate, and that determines the value of the property. Back in 2007, when the price that was being produced,
You don't think we're similar to like '07 right now?
oh, we'll be way worse than that. We're gonna
Wait. Look at this, folks. He's predicting, Mark. You're telling me there's going to be a real estate crash?
yeah, we're already in it. We just don't realize it. We're already in it.
Okay, so
We think that's a correction. People think that we're correcting. We're going like this. The correction will be just passing each other by as they cross.
So you
through.
think, okay. So obviously you think there's going to be more inventory than there are buyers, right? It's going to make it crash.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's going to take a little
So
while.
where do you think inflation continues, climbs?
Yes. Yeah.
You think it climbs still?
Yes. I think we're going to be looking at rates. The economy isn't going to shut down. Not right now. There's still too much money in it. Think about all the economic injury development disaster loans, the EIDLs are out there. Those are loans that didn't get paid back, right? Mm-hmm. There are still billions of dollars of those loans out there that now are just starting to have to pay back. That's $2,700 a month. But that money's still in the system. Some people haven't spent that money. So there is a lot of money still out in the system. And what's going to happen, the Biden administration understands that he or any of the Democrats will never get reelected if we have an economy that crashes. Whoever's in office takes blame for that. So he knows and doesn't want that to happen. Bernie doesn't want that to happen. AOC doesn't want that to happen. They are going to pump stimulus into this spending bill. You look at this spending bill when it comes out.
Stimulus. So they're going to spend more money
Yes.
to put a Band-Aid in a gunshot wound.
And they're going to give it to the consumer.
The consumer, right?
They're going to give it to the consumer, and then what
So
they're
you
going
don't
to do
think you don't think we have a chance for a recession? That's what they were.
Oh, we do.
Okay.
But it doesn't begin with an R. So it begins with a D, and that's the only thing that will ultimately correct.
You mean depression?
Mm-hmm.
You're sitting here predicting we're going to have a depression.
Well, let me put it this way: if we don't, then we'll have a socialist economy that we'll never come out of, because there's only two solutions to the economy that we're in right now, Denny. Mm-hmm. Only two. One is ultimately what the free market normally produces to correct an out of balance situation. That's a depression. It's a recession, depression. But when the economy gets out of whack, the free market economy corrects itself by a depression. That's one way. The other way is hyperinflation, and that's how a socialistic country gets out of it.
Which means the value of the dollar will
go down.
Bupkis.
And here's what was the deciding factor in this, which
to
is
quote someone.
Yeah, that's right. What's really interesting about that is I've been looking.
Do you think this will happen like before 2024 or beyond that?
No, I think it'll happen before 2024.
So maybe next year you might see like.
I think we'll see. I think by. It depends on if this bill gets passed. See, there's a lot of Republicans that are going to jump on this spending bill because they need it to
But
get
I don't
passed.
understand. I think you're telling me that their logic is if they give more money away to the consumers, they will be hoodwinked into thinking that everything's good and everything's
Oh, they
okay.
will think it. When you give people stuff, you don't take it away from them. You know, give me free shit. That's what Bernie's motto is.
Yeah, there is no such thing as free stuff.
And you give it to them, and they've given it to them. Think about it. We have people that
Here's what
in their
I'm-
20s and in their 30s
Yeah.
that have a couple kids. They've been getting a few $1,000s a month extra from the U.S. government up until just at the end of last year.
See, how many of you don't realize, because I don't realize this. You're
Right.
telling me that they're getting extra money each month from the government for having kids,
Yes.
but they have to qualify by having a certain amount of income.
And they raised that income to about $120,000.
So the more money you make, the more you get from the government, not the opposite. It should be the poorer people that get help,
right.
not the richer people.
They're giving it. The people that are getting squeezed are the working poor. But
Well, yes.
But what's happened is that what they've done is there's a thing called an earned income credit. There's a thing called a child care credit, the earned income credit, child care credit, dependent care credit. First thing that again, this is all Bernie Sanders. This is socialist thinking. The first thing that they did was they made those refundable. Then they made them paid in advance. Now, some of this was done under the Trump administration, but then they made them not so the credit existed. So then what they did is they got the credit established.
But
they made them.
I'm trying to understand the logic.
Well, here you make them refundable, right? And then you pay them out in advance, like they do on the health tax credit.
Yeah.
You pay it in advance. So for all of 2021 and part of 2020, I guess it was, you got $750 a month if you had a child under 6 or something, and $500 a month if they were under 17. And you got that paid in advance. So they were
Like
writing
annualized? In a lump sum or
per month.
per month? Got it.
They were giving them this money per month. So it was an annualized credit, but they were paying in advance. And that was the credit. So when you filed your tax return, you didn't have any income on that because
And
that was the credit.
how long would this continue for?
Well, that continued for almost a year.
Okay.
So, and we've just been out of it. So I guarantee you the spending bill has that provision for that tax credit back in there.
Problem I have with a lot of the bills that they pass, it seems like only a fraction, 10 to 15%, actually goes towards what the bill is named after. Where does the rest of the money go?
Oh, well,
Special
you're
interest?
lucky if it even goes to that. I mean, the big joke is the Inflation Reduction Act. There's nothing in the Inflation Reduction Act that reduced inflation. Zero. It was all Green Deal. It's all the Green New Deal, and it's really convoluted. I mean, that Inflation Reduction Act, I think that the administration thought a lot of money was going to get pumped into the system, and it is. If you have a business and you have an electric truck, which there's only like one of them that's made. If you have an electric truck, you can get up to like $40,000 in credit against your income. See, those are the kind of stimulus things. Now, that's all geared to the electric vehicles, and it's not getting anything out there right away. But you watch this new bill that's out there, $1 trillion. It'll have a provision to reinstate the prepayment of the child tax credit and the dependent care credit. Everybody thinks, oh, that's no big deal, it's just credit. But that's the guaranteed income. That's giving families, $1,000, $1,500 a month in additional income.
For how long?
Forever. Goes forever.
That's better than Social Security.
It is.
I mean, I don't know where they're finding the money. Now, you did tell me in one of our many conversations that they passed in the House, but the Senate shot it down, where they were going to bring back a lot of the surtaxes for corporations and the wealthy
corporate
people.
minimum tax, was in there. The surtax for wealthy was in there.
So they are trying to raise taxes.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they need to start paying this tab down
Well,
of $34 trillion.
No. They're not trying to raise taxes. Keep in mind, they only want to raise taxes on what they define as the wealthy. Now, you have to understand taxes. You have to understand just in general how taxes work. You you can't you can tax away first of all, there's a thought that the wealthy are this same group of people. So when I'm talking about the wealthy, they're talking about the top 10% of the wage earners in the country, or the top 1%, right? But the sad fact is that those aren't Bill Gates and those people every year, year after year. They're not. Those people shelter their income, and they're not in those tax brackets. They're not producing that kind of income. They got stuff.
Well,
out there.
I've always said the wealthy find ways to not pay taxes.
Absolutely.
They hire the right people.
They pay people like me a lot of money.
Exactly.
To not
so ultimately, it's the lower to middle class that gets squeezed the most.
Right. And so again,
because from a percentage standpoint, they're paying a lot higher than these wealthy people are.
Absolutely.
And it's
but here's how they're paying it. They're paying it through inflation, because not everything's tagged to inflation in the tax code. So I can say I'm not going to tax anybody under $400,000. I'm not going to raise taxes on anybody $400,000. But if I've raised the cost of everything, and I've raised so that everybody has to get more income, first of all, it pushes me above that $400,000 limit. If that $400,000 limit isn't going up for inflation,
I think most people listening to this show do not make over $400,000.
No. But I'm saying they don't, and so they're thinking they're protected.
Right.
But let's say I'm making $120,000. Let's say my spouse is making $150,000. So we're making $270,000. We're under. I mean, that's nice. I'm putting money into retirement, right? Let's say inflation doubles. Well, I'm going to get more wages, right? I have to have more wages at that point. The embedded wages. I have to now get more wages. So they double my wages.
That's assuming
they double my
wage increases follows inflation. That doesn't always happen.
Well, once it doesn't happen right away, but it has to ultimately happen. Otherwise, people can't survive. Because if the cost of their goods and services are going up faster than their wages, and that's why I say it's important, and it's important to understand the reason we are where we are, and the reason that we haven't solved the problem is that we're now having wage increases. These wage increases now will become permanent. And so as labor costs become permanent in the price of goods and services, they have to go up. And so what we're going to have is a spiraling effect. As it goes up, the labor anticipates they need more money because they do. They ask for more money. The businesses jack the prices up further. The prices go up further. The labor says, I need more money. And you got to remember, business only has a certain number of places that they can cut. From an economic standpoint, you have to understand that a corporation. Now, I'm not talking about the small business, which are not really corporations. They're not taxed as corporations. But the corporations, the big Wall Street firms and all of that, Wall Street companies, those companies cannot pay taxes. They cannot. And I'll explain to you why. It's not that they don't want to. It's not that they don't. They can't. Because in the whole scheme of things, income to a corporation is the return that's produced to the investors. So it's easy as this. I have labor, I have materials, and then I have labor and materials, I have equipment, okay, in there, those kind of things. So if I get an increase, and then I have taxes, right? And then I have return on my investment. So let's say I'm General Motors, and we go to a union contract, and labor gets a 10% increase, right? So now my labor cost has gone up by 10%. Well, I can reduce material cost, buy cheaper materials, which I was doing from China, and now I can't, right? So I can buy cheaper materials. I can mechanize certain positions. I can hire more robots and get rid of labor. I can reduce my labor cost by getting rid of it and replacing it with robots. That's what Wendy's and McDonald's and all of those are doing. You go in there and see a kiosk. That kiosk is replacing that person that's standing behind the counter waiting for you to give them cash, right? So but all of these companies have done all of this. Now, what happens then if they have to pay tax? Well, then if they can't do something, it would reduce the return on investment. What happens if I reduce the return on investment? You as an advisor, you're going to say, well, look, Ford's got a better return. Let's go with Ford. Or let's get out of transportation completely. So you can't do that. If I reduce my return on investment, my investors go and I'm broke.
I think because of inflation, because people are holding on to their money, I think corporate profits are going to look soft for a while. Maybe we could see a rally by the end of next year, depending on. See, I don't know. Inflation has incrementally shown that it's going the opposite way. It has cooled off.
Well, no, that's
at least that's what they're making us believe it has, because the numbers went from 8.5 to about 7, right? So it's going in the right direction. But you're telling me what? That it's going to spike up again?
right. And I'll tell you, 1979, 1980. Look at that time. Everybody thought Carter had gotten inflation back under control. Interest rates had gone up, and they had gone up to around 6 or 7%. People thought it was because we started paying interest on savings accounts. The money market account came out then. Everybody thought that there was reasons why.
Okay.
But they thought it was just transitional. That it was going to.
So this is the head fake we're going through right now.
Exactly.
And then
exactly.
we're going to have hyperinflation.
Now,
kick
what
in.
happened after that? Prime hit 21%. Ginnie Mae mortgages hit 11. Conventional mortgages hit 15. A bunch of products came out. You're going to see these products.
You really think that we're going to see those times again?
Absolutely. That's what it's going to take to shut the economy off, because we pumped way too much. We've got trillions of dollars in the economy. It just can't be shut off.
Wow. Any other good news you want to share with the
No,
listeners
nobody.
out there?
Nobody ever wants to talk to me because I'm always bad news. But I'm not always bad news. Well, here's one. I will say one thing.
Yeah. What do you see positive going forward?
You can always make money in the economy. You just have to look at what's going on and be aware of what it is and hedge your bets. But so here's how do you make money in an inflationary economy? Let's say that we do get 20% interest rates. How do you make money in that economy? Well, one of the things I can do is borrow money now. If I could borrow money now at 6% fixed, right, and interest rates go to 11 or 12, I'm going to be paying that mortgage off with cheaper dollars.
But if you run out of money, what's the point? You're going to go bankrupt? See, that's the problem. It's like people with credit card debt. Well, I don't have to really pay it. I'll pay the minimum, and rates keep going higher and higher and higher.
Well, that's the buy.
So what's your logic behind let me borrow money now because rates are going to be higher? You still have to pay that money back.
Well, but you're paying it back with cheaper dollars. If inflation, let's take let's say we're
Are you
taking
following my
Venezuela.
reasoning? You're borrowing money because you don't have it. You have to pay it back anyway.
Right. But take a look at Venezuela, take a look at Cuba, take a look at some of those places.
I'd rather not.
I know, and most of us haven't, and we should.
Yeah.
If you really want to see what's going to happen, you got to look at this stuff. But here's what happens in Venezuela: they get paid in the morning, and they go out to the grocery store and buy everything they can.
All right, let me ask you this, because I don't really get into politics too much because people are emotionally attached.
Well,
And
I'm not
no. Let me finish my
go
question. If Republicans win the White House in 2024, don't you think that they're going to maybe put a stop to this free spending mentality, socialist mentality? Or do you think they're going to continue it?
Well, you would hope they would try to rein it in, like Reagan did when he got elected after Carter. You would hope that's our great white hope.
But when Reagan got in, inflation was through the roof, so he couldn't do it.
Well, when he got in,
didn't do it.
He did. He pushed some of that there because he pushed some of that inflation through because he shut the economy off. He did some things that people forget. In the first 2 years, they wanted to impeach him and get rid of him. I mean, in the first 2 years of his term, it was horrible out there because he was making us pay because we had to. He was making us pay for the sins of the past. Somebody's going to have to do that. I don't think, and this is why I was kind of getting at.
Yeah.
Politically, I'm not saying one or the other. I'm telling you, economically, there is a socialist faction, and that's not a political. That's an economic socialist faction, and then there's a faction on the other side that is more of a budget faction or whatever, and more of a free market, free enterprise factor. Okay, we're in a classic struggle right now between those two sides, and in the past, the free enterprise system has won out. But if it ever doesn't, and we have progressively gotten worse. I use that word progressive because it's a valid term. We started out with FDR. Look at all those things that were implemented. They didn't go away. Then with Johnson, look what happened. And those didn't go away.
The social programs.
The social programs. They got reined in to some degree, but they didn't go away. They're still there. They're still being funded. Now you go to Obamacare. Still there. Still being funded. And now on top of that, we're going to put the largest socialist package in history onto the books. We've already done the Inflation Reduction Act. That's a huge socialist. Pumps a bunch of money into the individuals in lieu of working. It takes money away from the free enterprise system. About 2 years ago, I thought there was one of two ways that we could go: a depression or hyperinflation, because we were moving down the path. So you ask, when interest rates started to move.
But 2 years ago, if you take COVID out of the equation, or this is after COVID, because prior to COVID, we had a booming economy, low interest rates, good GDP.
Right.
So back then, you saw this coming?
Yeah, because we had created a booming economy, but largely a lot of that had been done through stimulus as well. Trump did a lot of stimulus. It was just, he did the right thing. I mean, he at least was trying to stimulate the free enterprise market and trying to build it up faster, all right? And a lot of the stuff he did raised taxes on business. People don't realize that. It raised taxes on businesses. He did a lot of that.
I thought he lowered corporate taxes.
Rates. There's rate and volume.
Ah.
Rates went down. But say, for example, NOLs, net operating losses. Those were limited. You couldn't carry them back. You couldn't use 100% of them. That hurt a lot of businesses that are into the research and development areas and things like that. He put taxes and tariffs on stuff that created significant cost increases for businesses. So, so ultimately, he did. There were some things that were done there that you could see the writing on the wall, and frankly, it's probably a good thing that a Republican wasn't elected for the Republicans. It was probably a good thing they weren't elected in the last election, because what we've got right now coming, this hyperinflation, this depression, whichever way it goes, whoever's in office at the time is going to pay for that for a long, long, long time.
And your prediction is it'll hit next year. And obviously,
I think we'll be in the midst of it.
Biden will still be in office. And okay.
And remember, when this happened with Carter, all of this stuff started ramping up right before the reelection. That's why he didn't get reelected. And the timing on this is about exactly the same. And it makes sense because, and that's why I say the Republicans will buy into some of this stuff, because they want to get reelected as well. And so we're going to have a presidential election. No party's going to want to make them suffer. No party's going to want to stand up there and say, yeah, you guys all should pay ridiculous taxes. We're going to take money away from you, and I don't care if you go broke, right?
Someone has to come in and go, folks, we've got to pay this bill that just keeps growing.
Right.
We've got to.
And when your dad told you, I don't have the money, or you got to pay the bill, did you like that? No.
Oh, yeah, I love it. Yeah. Absolutely. But I didn't come from a spoon-fed rich family.
Neither
I
did
had to earn everything that I've earned. And I wouldn't know what it's like to have an easy life. And I am concerned about going forward, about our country. But besides the economical standpoint, I'm really concerned about the rhetoric, the polarization. No one's talking with each other. They're talking to each other. They're not agreeing on too much of anything. I think back in those days that you were quoting, the politicians didn't exactly like each other, but they decided to work together for the good of the people. It looks like they're not doing that right now. They're drawing the lines in the sand and says, "Hey, too bad, tough luck. This is my time. We're going to do it our way until you get elected, and then we'll do it your way." That's what it seems like to me.
You're right, Denny, but it's not political, it's economic.
Okay.
We have, and that's why you will never get agreement, because philosophically, you're one or the other. I can't be part socialist and part free market. It just doesn't work.
Right.
I'm either capitalistic, free market, or I'm socialist, communist, right? There's nowhere in between. And so that's why it's not because people hate each other. It's not because people politically hate each other. It's because philosophically, economically, they are in total disagreement, total opposite
So
extremes.
do you think the vast majority of our country now has a more of a socialist mentality, and that's what it is? Because it
Well,
seems like the conservative principles are the minority right now.
They absolutely are. We've given too many people too much free stuff.
Ah,
You do not take it away.
once they
Whether it's-
have it, right.
Once you have it, you can't take it away. Now, and so, and the other thing that's going on is that we no longer have control. We're not just the strong. We're not the solely the biggest economy.
Yeah, we're not the strongest
It doesn't make any
economy
difference.
anymore.
I mean, we are, but we're not at that point where it doesn't make any difference what happens in London. It doesn't make any difference what happens in Germany, what happens in China. We're dependent on all of that. It's an international economy. They're being affected by us. They're trying to react to us. But we have a global economy that can move offshore. Look at the guy we're trying to extradite back to the U.S. for crypto exchange. He was in the Bahamas, right? This is an international economy.
You mean the guy that every time you interview him, he shakes like an old man naked in an ice storm or something?
Yeah.
I could never. This whole crypto thing. I had some guests, and I've been quoted on the topic. Obviously, you see the home runs that people make and all the money they made. But for the average American, I always said, only invest money that you're willing to lose to try and, like being in Vegas.
Yeah.
Because to try and secure a retirement or invest money long-term in something like that, I never really saw the validity to it. And then look what happened. That guy, they don't know where his money went. He had all this money, and now he doesn't know where it is.
And look
Offshore somewhere.
yeah, I know. Well, I suppose he gave it all to charity.
Right,
Turns
sure
out he
did.
was the charity.
He was exactly right.
But he and Madoff, they were their own charities.
Exactly.
But you know what's interesting? Now, most people don't remember, but think back. What happened in the 80s that happened, early 80s that caused almost the same problem? Silver. The Butcher Brothers captured the silver market. Silver was becoming, and it was going through the roof because it was a smaller market than everybody anticipated, and they controlled price.
Okay.
Right? And it collapsed. And a lot of people were using silver as a cushion against what was going to happen in the economy.
I've been hearing that gold is going to skyrocket and just, buy it now. I mean, all these people, I don't know.
Well, here's what I thought was interesting. Crypto was the wild card in the decision as to whether or not we would have hyperinflation or a depression. Because if you tie your currency to something definitive, or you take that currency out of the hands of the government. So crypto was out of the hands of the U.S. government. If you take something out of the hands of the U.S. government, so they can't control their own
Yeah,
currency.
it's not regulated or anything, yeah.
So now they don't control their own currency, so they can't devalue the dollar to pay all this debt off.
But you can't tell me that crypto was not manipulated, because I don't believe
No,
that.
it was. But what I was saying is that, back in the 70s, in early 80s, we talked about going back to the gold standard because of the same thing. Worried about inflation, and that politicians would try to inflate their way out of the problem, and there's no governance. The government would just deflate their dollar. So we talked about trying to go back to the gold reserves. So crypto was that alternative. If crypto had survived, and it still may in some form, because it is a key component of blockchain, which is an accounting process that is being proposed worldwide, and that's going to go into play, and we can talk about that later. But crypto, and Bitcoin is a key component of that. All right. So, but here's the thing: if cryptocurrency had survived, then it would have forced governments to deflate rather than inflate their economy because they couldn't pay back with cheaper dollars. They couldn't control their currency. But now that crypto has basically been hit, it may come back, but not right away. And people don't view it as an alternative like gold. There's no stopping the socialistic side of government at this point of the economy. And if you look at it, any country that's gone socialist and then communist, they've done it pretty much along the ways that we're going. If somebody doesn't stand up, if we don't have some people stand up and fight against this and speak out against this, we are going to go down a path that I'm not sure we can change.
But Mark,
for a long
what
time.
would they do? They'll say, look, for the next year, we're all going to increase your taxes by X amount so we can pay down this debt. What's the answer?
Well, the answer, first of all, is for people to understand that they actually are paying for all of this stuff now. They just don't know it. And that the only way to solve it is they're going to be taking away all of their income. With a capitalistic.
What do you mean take away all their income?
With a capitalistic economy, people do better because a rising tide floats all boats, right? It's the concept that as the economy, the capitalistic system is a revenue side of the equation. A socialist system is a cost side of the equation. And you never make money on costs. You cannot you can't cut costs to wealth. You can't cut costs to a profit. You can't do that. You can control costs, but the only way you make a profit in a free market system or any system is to increase the revenue side.
It almost sounds like you're describing trickle-down economics.
Oh, it's absolutely. That's the only way it works. You have to get, everybody has to succeed. Some are going to succeed better than others.
But what doesn't work in a lot of those systems is the trickle-down and everything. Because you have the highly motivated people and you have the not motivated people. There are people who feel that they should get free stuff because they were born here, and they have a right to get free stuff.
That's right.
And then you have the entrepreneurial types that say, I don't want you to tell me what I need, I don't want you to limit what I'm going to make or tell me what to do, or I want less government in my life. I'm going to work 80 hours a week. Right. Whatever it takes, I have a vision, and I don't want you to stop me. I don't want you to say, yeah, you can't make this much money because that's too much, and we have to take care of these people here who don't want to work.
Right.
Why? Because they were born in America.
Right.
So that's the fight right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Either you're self-employed.
That is trickle down, really.
That is trickle down, yeah.
Because as soon as you make an economy where somebody can't succeed,
or limit it to it, right? You're putting limits on.
When you start talking about $1 million caps on income and all that, look, that person took a whole lot of risks. Most likely, most of those people weren't successful the first time. I was talking to you about the top 1%. Right. That top 1% are people who have owned their businesses for 35 or 40 years. They're now retiring. They get a one-time sale, and it makes them one of the top 1%. So we're going to tax it all away? What do they do for They worked all their lives for that money. There's no income averaging anymore. They worked all their lives. Right. So what you're talking about, Danny, is where we have to be. As soon as there's an economy where there's no opportunity for unlimited success, I mean, I don't know what Musk's political background is, but I can tell you this. He's the kind of person that makes a capitalistic system go. You don't have to love the guy, but he's the guy out there trying to put people on the moon, on Mars. He's the guy that's out there trying to produce a vehicle that's better for the economy. You only do that if you can ultimately be a billionaire when you're done.
Well, it's like the old sales principle in most organizations that 20% of the sales force do 80% of the revenues.
That's pretty much
because they're motivated to push themselves beyond their comfort zones, to take risks, as you say.
Right.
And that's kind of our country was founded upon. We took a risk when we decided to leave England and form our own colonies elsewhere.
Oh, absolutely.
There was no guarantee waiting for us. They could have died. They could have failed. But that's, I don't know, a lot of these socialists, like you're telling me, and I didn't even think about this because I manage money for a living. I'm not a CPA tax person like you, that they're getting all these credits for having children and making X amount of it. Where's the money coming from?
Right.
We don't know.
Well,
these bills that
no,
are being
I know where
passed.
it's coming. It's borrowing.
Borrowing.
We borrowed $34 trillion.
Right.
We put it on our credit card. And we're going to continue to put it on our
Well,
credit card.
you've probably, if anything, not that I'm a doom and gloom guy, but you validated a few of my suspicions that we're in trouble because of the debt, and their solution is to print more money.
Right. And here's the thing, and this is what.
Why am I laughing? It's not funny. It's scary.
But the solution is to print more. And here's what the problem is: we have had the lowest inflation in history.
But it was kept artificially low because they didn't want to stump the economy. They
Well,
wanted
right now it
investor
has-
sentiment.
At the end, it was. Early on, we had a very low inflation rate because we had very low inflation. It was worldwide. We had very low inflation.
Okay.
All right. So we had that situation, for a long time. As a result of that, when you look at the government's budget, let's look at macroeconomics, which is the government's budget. You look at gross national product, gross domestic product, all of that. As part of the government's budget, which this is a budget bill, this is a spending bill that's right there right now. So you got to look at what's in there. Look at in the past.
Are we in danger usually in Christmas of the government shutting down if they don't agree on this again?
Well, there probably will, but I can guarantee you that this spending bill does not budget for all of the costs that the government's got. Because what they're going to do is, in the old days, prior to 2006, 2007, to that age, when we had normal inflation of maybe 4 or 5%, right, 6%, interest on government debt was about 80% of the discretionary number, right? Think about it now. Now we're up to 6, and that debt is 10 times, 20 times higher than it was. So if I create a budget right now, think what kind of revenue I have to get to just cover the borrowing that we already did. We're already broke, Denny. We just haven't faced it yet. We haven't gone to bankruptcy court yet, but we're already broke as a country. We've spent it all. We've borrowed it. It's just like my EIDL loan. I owe $2,700. I don't have the money to pay it. I'm just like the U.S. government. I got a $34 or $36 trillion bill, and I don't have the money to pay it. And that's where we're at. Something has to happen. Either I have to inflate the economy so I can afford to make those payments and keep me rolling, or it all crashes because I can't pay my bill.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's time to move to Argentina or Brazil or something.
No, you don't want to go to any of those places. You don't want to go anywhere there.
Oh, my goodness. I think, if you're listening to this podcast, I hope you had your coffee. And you mentioned a lot. Again, you're such an analytical. We didn't talk more about music and some of the other things. You think you're going to run again? I mean, you threw your name in a hat and you lost. It was a close race, right? Would you lose by 500 votes or something?
300, yeah.
300 votes.
But it's why I ran.
I know to bring the issues up front.
Just an awareness of the issue, and so you ask, will I run again? If I see that people aren't doing what everybody wants them to do, not what I want them to do, but what everybody wants them to do, then I'll run again. When politicians stop listening to the people, regardless of what you're talking about, when politicians stop listening to the people and they start worrying about themselves, that's when you got to make a change.
Well, I get that. I think, however, people are not really tuning in. They're kind of sticking their heads in the sand right now, and for reasons, because there's a lot of uncertainty out there with the inflation, with the economy, global politics that are going on. So it's going to be rough. I mean, let's see what happens in the next year or two.
Right.
I mean, certainly we've had a lot happen in these last 2 years that I would not have predicted, but you did. You saw this coming. And
A blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then.
yeah, even a broken clock is right twice a day, right?
That's right, exactly right.
Anyway, good to have you, man. Let's talk more music, and appreciate all that you do for music. And Stuart, you're really involved in the community. You and Ron Hart and some other people. Before we end the podcast, anything happening for Stuart in the foreseeable future that's kind of cool or interesting for the next year?
Well, I think I do think that Stuart's got it really has done a really good job. It has attracted, we've talked about the number of people coming to Florida.
Yeah,
and it has attracted a lot of those people. I mean, a larger number than normally would probably.
But
consider.
Stuart has so much waterway.
Right.
It's a beautiful area.
Right.
There's no other area quite like that.
And so Stuart right now is it's a great place. And what's happened is people who have a lot of money and want to move to Florida are not looking necessarily at Miami or even Orlando, but are looking at places like Martin County. And so
those other places, the traffic alone is ridiculous.
Right.
I mean, I live in Jupiter. I love it here. This is just, I don't think it's a secret anymore, but I said it was the jewel of Palm Beach County and the best kept secret because it's less congested. They're not building more. And Stuart kind of reminds me of that as well. That they're not going to make it a commercial building block for businesses to come in. So you can still raise a family. Traffic is still okay. It's not like Miami or Orlando or some of these other bigger cities. Yeah. At the end of the day, if you have money, I think that's what matters. Raising a family in a nice environment, not in a high-rising, congested, mass shooting environment.
Right. And hopefully they're going to Stuart's at a crossroads because you've got a lot of people that have come in with money.
Yeah.
There's a real risk from a housing standpoint that we price out those people who.
Well, wait a minute. You said the housing market's crashing, man. So
that's the good thing. Seriously. People talk about affordable housing.
Yeah.
I'll tell you my quote on affordable housing. Affordable housing isn't affordable unless you can afford it. You cannot subsidize your way to affordable housing. You have to make it. So that either is bring down the prices because the economy brings down the prices.
Or make more money.
Or make more money.
Right.
Or, you can any of those things will ultimately do it. But ultimately that's how you and then you can have affordable housing. But anyway, so it's going to be interesting. Stuart's in an interesting time. I think as a country, we're in an interesting time. This is going to be one of those things where you and I look back.
We're going to look back
when they're spooning the soup into us at 90 and say, Denny,
speak for yourself.
Remember?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe then we won't even know who we are or where we are, so it won't matter. Anyway, hope you enjoyed some of this analytical economic forecast that Mark has put. You think you depressed people with some of the reality?
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Humbug.
Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, and Happy Festivus.
And I would say Scrooge had remember A Christmas Carol. There was a happy ending to that, and that's where we're going. That's where we may be in the early stages.
That's right.
But we're going to be visited by maybe 3 or 4 ghosts of an economy, and once those are over, even Scrooge's heart will change.
So if you want to be uplifted, Mark has a radio show every week on WSTU. Is it on Tuesdays or Wednesdays?
I have one on Monday that's on condos and one on Wednesdays that's an economic show.
So you hit people twice a week.
Yeah, one is specifically condo. So if
all
you've
right,
got
well,
condo
listen,
questions, join me.
Enjoy the holiday season. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Denny Artachi Show.